Can you enjoy 007 First Light if you're not a Bond fan? The last James Bond video game came out in 2012. That's 14 years. That's a long time for the world's most famous spy to show up on a gaming platform. So when IO Interactive, the Hitman people, announced they were making a Bond game, the reaction from the gaming community was something like cautious optimism wrapped in a very British kind of anxiety. And when it finally dropped in May of this year, reviews flooded in from critics who had clearly been waiting a long time to make shaken, not stirred jokes. But here's the question that most of the reviews didn't really answer. What if you just don't really care about James Bond? What if you've never seen a Bond film, or you've watched one once on cable and thought, man, that guy's kind of a reckless driver? Does 007 First Light still work for you? That's what we're going to find out. Let's set the table. IO Interactive is the studio behind the modern Hitman trilogy, a series of games where you play a bald assassin named Agent 47 who has the uncanny ability to blend into literally any crowd despite looking exactly like a bald assassin. Those games are brilliant. They're weird, creative, replayable playgrounds, so when they announced in 2020 that their next project was a Bond game, an original story not based on any specific film, the logic was obvious. They know how to make a stealth action sandbox. They know how to make a man in a suit do cool things in expensive locations. They know how to make a game that rewards players who pay attention and forgives players who don't. Development ran for about 6 years. The game was revealed properly in June of last year and landed on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, and PC on May 27th. Switch 2 is getting a version later this summer if that's your situation. The premise is a Bond origin story, and I mean origin. This is James Bond before he's James Bond. Before the number, before the license, before he's earned the right to introduce himself in that particular order.
It's really quite simple. Bond is a bullet without a target. Let's give him one.
You're playing a young naval air crewman who does something heroic, gets pulled into MI6's 00 program, watches a mission go sideways, and then spends the rest of the game untangling the conspiracy behind it. This game feels good to play, and I say that as someone who has played a lot of games that feel like homework. The combat is snappy and satisfying. You can go loud with guns and explosives if the mood strikes, and the game lets you. Environments have a gratifying level of destructibility, and if you want to turn a chateau in Slovakia into a controlled demolition, nobody's going to stop you. But the game is equally happy if you want to ghost an entire level without a single body hitting the floor. This is where the Hitman DNA really shows up. Locations feel like actual places rather than shooter corridors. There's verticality, there's social spaces, there are conversations happening in the background that you can either eavesdrop on or interrupt depending on how Bond you're feeling. The game quietly rewards players who look around and experiment. You're not going to run out of ways to approach a situation. The pacing is one of the things I enjoyed the most. After a relatively slow opening at MI6 that functions as the game's extended tutorial, it basically takes the hand-holding guardrails off and lets you loose. And from that point forward, it moves at the kind of pace that's friendly to people who can only play in 90-minute windows. And I appreciate that. Missions feel self-contained enough that you can put it down and pick it back up without feeling lost. The stealth system is forgiving without being toothless. Guards have actual AI behavior, there are sight lines to manage, and getting caught feels consequential without being punishing. It's not quite as deep as the Hitman games at their best, and if you're coming in as a hardcore stealth fan, you might find the ceiling a little low. But as an accessible action adventure that trusts players to make interesting choices, it works. It absolutely works. One thing the game handles well? Variety. Missions don't repeat the same rhythms. You've got a gala infiltration, a car chase through mountain roads, a fight scene that turns into a deception sequence, a levels within levels social puzzle. IO was deliberately designing against repetition, and the campaign earns its runtime. Here's where the game actually earns its place, and where non-Bond fans should pay attention. The story is good. Not just like it's good for a video game good. I mean, it's really good. It's a well-written espionage thriller with a protagonist you actually want to follow, a supporting cast that has real relationships with him, and a villain who gets enough screen time to feel like an actual threat rather than a plot device in a suit.
Issues with authority.
I believe it's more a case of authority having issues with me.
Patrick Gibson plays Bond, and he's great. He's playing a Bond who hasn't figured out how to be Bond yet. He's confident but not invincible, charming but not smooth, and capable but still making mistakes. It's a character arc, and it actually completes. By the time the credits roll, you understand why this person becomes the version of 007 everyone knows.
Bond. James Bond.
And this is a spoiler-free review, but I want to say, the tone is the thing I want to highlight specifically for non-fans. This isn't the grim Daniel Craig era, where Bond's emotional damage is practically its own character. But it's also not the Roger Moore era, where a man can ski off a mountain and parachute away with a Union Jack parachute, and everyone treats this as a reasonable Tuesday. It's lighter than the Craig films, smarter than the campy stuff, it's self-aware enough to have fun, but grounded enough to take the stakes seriously.
Well, what are we waiting for?
There's that English sang-froid. Bonne chance, James.
It doesn't feel like homework, and it doesn't feel like a theme park ride. It feels like a good spy movie you haven't seen. And you don't need to know anything about James Bond to follow it. The game tells you everything you need, and the lore is scaffolding. It's not a prerequisite. Now, that said, there's a whole other layer here for people who want to go deeper. The game is absolutely stuffed with references to the wider Bond universe, like the scar on Bond's cheek that is from the books but never quite made it over to the movies. I'm probably not qualified to walk you through all of them myself, but there's a great video about it over on IGN. None of this is required to enjoy the game, but if you want to go looking, there's a lot waiting for you. IO Interactive made a beautiful game. The environments range from snow-covered mountain passes to underground black market lounges to brutalist government buildings that look like they were designed specifically to make you feel like you shouldn't be there, which is perfect. Character models are detailed, cutscenes are cinematic, and the whole thing runs cleanly on current-gen hardware. Nothing here is going to make your hardware sweat or your frame rate apologize. I played it on a standard PS5 and it looked great. Okay, what didn't work? I want to talk about the gadgets. Bond is famous for his gadgets. The pen that's actually a bomb. The wristwatch that's also a grappling hook. The car that turns into a submarine. The history of Bond gadgetry is essentially a timeline of spy cinema's most creative nonsense, and it's wonderful. In first light, the gadgets are fine. They exist, they have uses, they occasionally open up a new approach to a situation, but they rarely feel indispensable. I never found myself in a moment where I thought, thank God I have this or I'd be completely stuck. They feel more like optional flavoring than core mechanics.
You're off the menu.
My best guess is this game was built to be accessible. IO wanted non-gamers to be able to pick this up, and a deeply gadget-dependent game punishes players who don't pay attention early on. So the gadgets get softened into supplements rather than tools. I understand the choice, but I don't have to love it. A sequel, if we get one, and there's more on that in a moment, should lean harder into the gadget sandbox. There's also a villain whose motivations, while not bad, don't quite land with the weight the game wants them to. The final act reveals a little too much through dialogue and a little too little through action. Not a deal breaker, but it's worth naming. So about that sequel. One thing I thought about a lot while playing the game was how much I hoped this would become an ongoing franchise from IO Interactive. Their experience with Hitman is a perfect fit for an action adventure featuring super spies and mysteries and just general mayhem. They know how to craft a solid story and gameplay that balances the intrigue and the explosions in a way few developers can. This is a very accomplished studio firing on all cylinders with a passion for the source material as well as respect for players who aren't all that into James Bond. In a way, it sounds too good to be true. Because it is too good to be true. This is 2026 after all, and we can't have nice things. IO Interactive made a deal with MGM Studios that included self-publishing the game. A few years later, Amazon bought MGM Studios, and that eventually included full creative control of the Bond franchise. See where this is going? When asked about future 007 games, Amazon's GM of gaming responded, "We did not make First Light," Gaddis explained. "We do have a stake in it because we now own the IP, but that IP acquisition happened after the First Light IO deal was already done." He also added, while Amazon didn't have the full rights to this First Light James Bond game, any future games will be done by MGM and theoretically by Amazon Game Studios. That doesn't sound very promising for IO Interactive. More importantly to me is that doesn't sound very promising for me and my ability to play another game in this series with this game engine, with these writers and character models and voice actors. Mark my words right now. It's July 2026. Amazon will try to make the next game themselves. They'll think they know how to do it better, and years from now we'll look back at this First Light game as the high watermark for Bond games since GoldenEye. Okay, future me here. There was an update to this situation while I was in the process of editing this video, and it's probably good news. GamesIndustry.biz reported that Jeff Gaddis clarified those comments I just spoke about, saying we did not confirm anything about who's publishing or developing the next Bond sequel. He added, "Given the success of this one, I think you probably want IOI developing it." The question even came up of whether Amazon would be interested in purchasing IOI outright, but he said there were no conversations about that right now. So okay, there's still hope that IOI makes the next Bond game, but now I'm worried they might get swallowed up into the Amazon machine. And we see time and time again that the big guys like Sony, Microsoft, Amazon, and so on are willing to pay just about anything to acquire creative and talented studios, but within a few years they lose the stomach to pay for those salaries and benefits. But I digress. Let's get back to the original question. So, can you enjoy 007 First Light if you're not a Bond fan? Yes, without asterisks. What IO Interactive have built works on two levels at once: a polished, accessible action-adventure for people who just want a well-made spy game, and, for anyone who wants to pull on the threads, a game that quietly makes the Bond universe feel worth exploring rather than intimidating. You don't need to do homework to enjoy it, but if you want to, there's a lot there. Busy adult gamer? It's a well-paced campaign with enough hours to feel complete without overstaying its welcome. No filler, no padding, nothing that feels like a chore. Curious about Bond but don't know where to start? This is a better entry point than sitting down with 26 films in chronological order. Trust me. The gadgets could be more interesting, the villain could land harder, but those are sequel problems. If we get a sequel. This one? Thumbs up. 007 First Light earns the number. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe for more gaming for busy gamers.